All right. I am thrilled to introduce our Direction, Not Perfection community today to Dr. Alan Rozanski, a distinguished professor of medicine at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai and director of nuclear cardiology at Mount Sinai St. Luke. He has dedicated his career to exploring and pioneering research to help clients understand how to maintain and enhance vitality in their daily lives. I'm going to say it again, maintain and enhance vitality in our daily lives. Yes, please. Welcome, Dr. Rozanski.
It is a pleasure to be here. I've had the opportunity to hear some of your podcasts and what you're doing for your community, and it's tremendous. It's just really, I'm quite impressed.
I am so honored to have you with us today, and I feel like we could talk for the next 3 hours. So I'm going to try really hard to grab as much as I can from you in our time together. And if you don't care, if you can humor me, I'm going to read a little blurb from your bio because I think it kind of gives us everything that I would love to unpack with you today. But it states that combining your extensive expertise in cardiology and health psychology and behavioral medicine with the guidance of a comprehensive model, these 6 domains of health, that you bring this really unique perspective, which I do think that, and it just makes you this compelling voice in the discussion of achieving and maintaining, again, those words, that health and vitality. Let's just start unpacking with this first piece. Like, I think it's very unique that you have cardiology and psychology and behavioral health all in the same sentence, that you've meshed all that together. How did that come to be in your professional world?
It happened by happenstance. It really was kind of almost an accident. I was finishing up my cardiology fellowship. I took a position at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in a very technical field called cardiac imaging, nuclear cardiology. It's a way that we put people on a treadmill and we test their heart function. And I started doing research with it, and it was technical stuff. And after about 2 to 3 years, I just wasn't feeling with a lot of vitality. There was something kind of missing. So I learned about this MacArthur Foundation sabbatical fellowship, and it was about to promote, multidisciplinary looks at the determinants of health promoting and health damaging behavior. So it had to be multidisciplinary. I was very intrigued by that. So at that time, we'd begun to notice that using ambulatory recordings of the electrocardiogram, that people were getting what we call ischemia, lack of blood supply during daily life activity, like when they were driving and some usual activities, and usually without chest pain. And we did not understand the phenomena. So I had the idea, well, why don't we take patients that we put on a treadmill and we exercise them and look at the wall motion of their heart while they're exercising? And why don't we look at that while they're under mental stress as well? Got hooked up with a Dr. Herb Weiner, who was the head of psychosomatic medicine at UCLA, a world expert. And he put me in touch with some behavioral psychologists. And they said, look, this is how you do it. You have patients come in and you have them do a series of tasks, serial sevens, subtractions, a kind of video game, and then just ask them to speak about the personal stress in their life. So the second patient that we're doing was a man 59 years old. He was about to lose his job. And as he's talking about this stress, and we're looking at the wall motion of his heart, if you have normal heart function, it should all speed up, get more contractile when you exercise. If someone has a blockage in one of the coronary arteries, as you're exercising them, that wall slows down or stops moving. That's how we diagnose heart disease. And then it comes right back. It's in a controlled situation, so the patients are not in trouble with this. As this man is speaking about the stress in his life, one of his walls slows down and stops moving, just as with exercise. In fact, we put him on a bike afterwards, and he exercised, and the same thing happened. Well, it turned out that half of the patients we did, this occurred. And we published a study in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's been reproduced in about 30 medical studies since. And this was my aha moment. It was like in living color. Hey, wait, there is this mind-body relationship. And then I got this sabbatical fellowship. And for 2 years, even though I was a cardiologist at Cedars-Sinai, half my time was on these campuses at Yale and Bethesda and so forth, meeting and hearing about all of the work that people were doing in the relationship between psychological factors and health outcomes. And that was how it all began.
Oh, that's so interesting. And so, just to make sure our listeners are following,
In other words, we were taking people with known heart disease. So these were,
with known heart
yeah,
disease. Okay.
and they were people who were suspected to be in trouble because they were having typical angina. And this was also in a day, this was done in the 1980s, where heart disease was a sicker form of disease. And
Hmm.
this was happening, and we did a bunch of normals. None of this happened in normal people. Okay. So,
Okay.
but it can happen in people with significant heart disease, that it's not just exercise, but mental stress can also induce this lack of blood supply, or what we call ischemia. Yes, that can happen.
Okay, and so let's follow up this with one more thing, with a like a client case study almost. That now that you're seeing such this connection of mind and body, treatment for a patient would probably look different, right? So like what does that look like now that you that's all so clear versus maybe what it would have looked like for a client?
So let me give you two parts to answer that. In terms of
Okay.
treating heart disease, we're quite clear. We treat all the risk factors, hypertension. If they have heart disease, we're going to get the cholesterol level much lower than the average person. We're usually going to use statins or other lipid lowering medications. Most of these people treat diabetes. If there's some abnormality on the stress test, we might consider an angioplasty in the patient.
Mhm.
The key thing was that this work that I was doing in the early years was looking at the effects of acute stress and heart disease. But as I began to do this work and get exposed to the work of others, I got much more interested in what are the chronic factors that are contributing to heart disease. And in the 80s, one of the leading factors we began to look at was depression. And today, everyone accepts that depression is a risk factor for heart disease, and it's a potent risk factor. In the 1980s, that wasn't accepted. We didn't know the mechanisms and so forth. Now we know the body literally goes haywire when people are depressed and it's not well treated. They develop autonomic dysfunction and the amygdala arises, they get insulin resistance, much increased risk of diabetes, heart disease, and so forth. So that was the beginning of my looking at what are these chronic factors that cause heart disease. And I began to realize, and this was probably the most important aspect of this, that all of this could be studied objectively. Basically, the body testifies as to what's healthy and unhealthy. So those things that prolong life, protect the physiology, and cause a less risk of disease, there are healthy things like exercise. Those things which do the opposite, like smoking, are unhealthy. And that's how I came to these six domains of health, because the data over time showed that it's not just physical factors like being physically active and the quality of your diet and whether you get sleep, but it's also your emotional states. It's the quality of your thinking, it's the nature of your social life, your sense of purpose, and how you manage stress. All of those factors, when you're humming in those areas, you are actually promoting health and you're promoting vitality. And in the opposite domain, it's doing the opposite. I didn't make this up, and I didn't discover this overnight. This is what the data showed me over the course of years. So it's not a debate. This is just the body standing up and testifying.
Yes, and I am so appreciative of you spreading this word. I feel like individuals are getting more and more aware of the importance of not just diving into just nutrition, just fitness, that there really is this broad span. So let's keep unpacking with this because I'm going to read them back. You kind of started to mention them, but these six domains of health being exercise, muscle care, diet, sleep, emotions, and thinking quality. This is all interesting to me because somebody might go, exercise is different than muscle care, or emotions are different than thinking quality.
Yeah,
So let's kind of pick each one of those apart and your belief system around it. So let's just keep going with exercise for a moment and even how you treat your own body or encourage within your own family.
absolutely. Well, you know, if we accomplished only one thing today, I'd start and finish with exercise. It is the base for everything. It's the base of how you want to approach life, to feel vital, to feel a stronger sense of confidence. It's the base. So that's what you got to start with. Now, I'm dealing with, though, a audience that's a little different than yours because I'm dealing with patients who are generally coming to me who many of them are extremely sedentary. And the goal is to get them going. And to do that, you really have to have a lot of psychological tools, which really relate to all of the other domains. How do you motivate people? How do you get them going? How do you keep them going? And there's no one set tool for any given person. But over the years, I'll tell you a story, if I may.
Yeah.
So when I came back to Cedars after the sabbatical, I was able to start their preventive and rehabilitative cardiology program. This is where we take people who've had heart attacks or have had bypass surgery, and we're putting them through a program. And we were getting people who were in their 70s, older women, frail, who had never exercised in their lives. And the program was putting them through a 12-week program, an hour, 3 times a week. And then we had an extension program where people could sign up, and they did in large numbers. And that was early in my career. And I was able to see, wow, take these older people who've never exercised, and they were transformed. So
Mm.
I came from a family where we were all physically active, so I didn't have to convince myself about being physically active. But that's what, more than any other factor, I'll talk about exercise all the time. I can talk about all the tools of it and how do you get going? How do you keep going? But you can start with exercise.
I have chills as you're talking because again, we all want that thing of like, what do we lean into? And I would venture to say that you're not talking like we don't have to go run a marathon. We just need to move. And what are your thoughts around when you're telling a patient or a 70-year-old who's never moved before and you're putting them through a program? What did the program look like and how did you ease them into it?
Well, first of all, cardiac rehab is only available for people after they've had a heart attack or whatever. That's a deficiency in our healthcare system. We
Mhm.
have a treatment gap right now where we now identify many patients well before heart attack and they're sedentary and we don't have programs for them. So we need people like you to be out there in the general domain, helping people to get more physically active, which is what you're doing. So the first place I start is one of the great principles, and I'm sure you'll agree, is what we call self-efficacy. People will only take on things that they think they can do. So when you look at the guidelines, which say like 150 minutes of exercise per week, 30 minutes of moderate exercise 5 times a week, good luck taking someone who's been sedentary and older. What we want to do is we want to get them on the playing field. We want to get them to believe, first of all, in what I call the power of the first step. The power of the first step. Get them on the playing field. And that says that any physical activity counts. And by the way, there was a huge transformation in the 2018 guidelines. Every 10 years, the federal guidelines are published on exercise. And they were changed in 2018 based on new data, which had just come out based on accelerometer data, which we hadn't had before, which actually showed that any amount of physical activity, any amount, even if it's only about 10 minutes, contributes to better health. So you just have to get people on the ground. That means if I take an older person, I convince them, look, once a day, can you give me 5 minutes? And they'll say, yeah, doc, I think I can do that. But then that's just the beginning. Then you want to use what I call the power of specificity. Well, what is that specific thing you're going to do that you're going to commit to? And make sure that they're committing to that. And that might look like, well, I do go to the store and I park real close, but if I park at the end of the thing, I can get 5 minutes of physical activity.
Yeah.
I say, well, then can you commit to that? So you get the commitment. And then if you say, I want you to come back in 2 weeks and tell me how you're doing for that particular reason. Now you're telling them that's important. And then you can discuss it. And by the way, many people have a lot of difficulty doing that first step.
Yeah.
We think these things, it's huge to cross that first step. That's the place to get going. But that's how I get going.
No, it's so good. You give them really great accountability too,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I'm
They're
obviously a
very,
huge advocate of, but I feel like my clients always say, I know what to do, I just need to do it. But we kind of don't know what to do if we're not doing it. It's really this, and you're giving them an idea and then the accountability to come back, see how it went, tweak it, and make adjustments. And it's really comfortable to hear a physician talk about it can be baby steps. Sometimes I feel like clients walk in and get this high intensity and they're like, to your point, if they can't picture themselves doing it, they're not going to take the first baby step to accomplish it. So I love to get them on the playing field. Thank you for that.
sure,
It's
sure, sure.
good.
Sure.
And then what is the difference with this? Okay, when you think about muscle care versus exercise,
Yeah.
talk on that. Mm.
So that is one of my important points here. If you look at most doctors, they'll just group exercise together.
Mhm.
Resistance training is something people do a lot less of than exercise. But we're facing an issue today where as people get older, and thank God this is a tremendous blessing of our time that people are getting older, they're living longer.
Yeah.
But we have to think about how we're going to be when we're in our 70s, 80s, and 90s. And one of the things that happens is beginning in your 30s, you start to lose muscle mass, bone density, your basal metabolic rate starts to decrease. And after age 60, that all accelerates. If you're not taking care of your muscles, which is together the biggest organ of your body, you risk actually outgrowing your muscles. So you have to take this on. Now, why it's separated from exercise is that people need instruction on how to do resistance training. And it's something that people often don't like as much. I talk about the certain polarity in terms of, on the one hand, it's nice to do exercises that you enjoy, but it can be the whole story because you got to do also things that you might not enjoy because your resistance training may demand that because you want to hit, the quads, the hips, the glute muscles, and all these areas. And first of all, people don't know what to do. So people need to find that. They have to find a physiatrist or, maybe a good friend can do it. Or, today, kids are playing a lot of sports. They pick up a lot of this stuff and do it for a lifetime. But I'm dealing again with patients who are older and they need instruction. And one key thing that the other reason is the one thing we want to really avoid more than anything else is injury. Injury can
Yes,
set you
yes.
so far back. And so you really want to do that under guidance. So I put resistance training as a separate domain as opposed to aerobic exercise.
And I 100% agree with that. I love the differentiation there. And the way I picture that too, you were mentioning you normally have the patient who's already been sick and we need to do more on this preventative scale too. I keep feeling like once we hit a certain age, wouldn't it be wonderful if we all had PT options coming into our house or personal trainers, just putting that idea that that's part of our preventative care as we age is that we need built-in time in our week. And how are we going to get that under guidance so that we're not getting hurt? Because I can't tell you how many individuals I've seen who get gung-ho and they're so excited to finally like turn their health around and then they get injured and it sets them back to where they're discouraged and they don't want to start again. So,
That is such a great point. It's a great point. I see in my neighborhood, a lot of houses are being built up and more. So you're taking care of your house. First house you have to take care of is your own house. Now, the thing about a physical therapist coming, or a trainer coming, I should say, is it costs money.
yeah.
But what an investment. That's building your own house. So, it's your value system. What are you going to budget into? So, I would make that, I do make that investment.
Me too. I am a trainer and I hire trainers because the accountability piece and then teach me
Yeah,
something.
yes, yes.
And before we leave exercise or muscle care, can you confirm this? I feel like I've read multiple studies that mention movement decreasing risk of dementia or Alzheimer's by up to 60%. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yes, that is correct. It decreases your risk for many chronic diseases, and also it decreases your risk for dementia to some degree. But also interesting, there's a woman at Pittsburgh. Her name is Patricia Boyle, and she's done a series of studies where they looked at older people who were then being followed after baseline where they didn't have dementia, and she was able to look at different things like people's sense of purpose. And they found that people who had a higher sense of purpose actually had developed less dementia. And they also were able to take some of these people to autopsy. And they were able to find that on autopsy, people who had the same findings relative to dementia had less expression of disease if they were living with a high sense of purpose. You know,
Wow.
now
Wow.
I can extract that particular data more for that purpose as opposed to exercise, but I think they're kind of interrelated in terms of how those factors work.
Right. It's almost hard to separate them out. Yeah. Interesting. That's so good. Thank you for that.
Sure.
All right. We'll move on to food, to diet here. I know we don't have all the time in the world, but give us kind of your quick and dirty with diet.
Okay. It deserves to be that way because the biggest problem we've made is made the story about diet so complicated. This is the problem that the public is facing. If you will go into Google and you'll say, what's a good diet? You'll get different answers. If you go to different doctors, you may get a pause and different answers. Not only because we're not, there's this whole, there's truth into we're not training doctors enough in nutrition. But here's the thing, the real story here is that there's a lot of debate in terms of red meat, not red meat, plant-based diet, low carb, gluten-free, and so forth. And there's some aspects where one of those diets may be better than another. But the big story is the highly processed foods. 60% of the calories that both children and adults in America get is from highly processed foods. Now, it's a little complicated because we need food processing and we need some highly processed food processing because of the nature of where we are today in terms of mass production of food, shelf life, convenience, which is a big thing. But where you got to go is if you want to be healthier, you have to have more healthy foods in your diet. You need, a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruits, different colors, because the different colors give you different vitamins and minerals and so forth. So there's truth to this eating a rainbow of fruits and vegetables. You want to have, beans, quinoa. So you start to put in more of these healthy foods and say 1% less today of highly processed foods. We use power of the first step again. Focus first on let's put more healthy foods into our diet. Again, I use exercise as a first step to getting people on a better diet because as a general rule, if you'll strengthen yourself in one area of your physical being, you start to gain strength in other areas. That's just a principle of life. So I put that in. I say, look, this is a key, and feeling good is another part of diet because if you'll just look empirically, this data is profound. When you look at people that say optimistic versus pessimistic, happy versus unhappy, great social life, lonely, highly stressed versus normally stressed, in all of those areas where people are negative, they tend to have poor diets. So that's just empiric data, but it just suggests, hey, when we're having more vitality in our lives, we're eating better. It just kind of works together.
Yeah, I call those ripple effects, right? It's like if you can get one area flowing, it ripples into the next.
Yeah.
And I love your point with the food too. It's funny, just this simple thinking of eat the colors of the rainbow. It feels too simple to people because they are so used to all this other information coming at them that they're like, it can't be that simple. It can't be just going back to good fruits and vegetables and whole foods. And it's such a great place to start
Yeah.
and get on the playing field.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yes.
Well, part of this
Ah,
with food is time, right? I mean, it takes time it's so much easier to take something out of a bag, or a prepared food. It's just prepackaged food. So it's a question of time too.
well, it is an expense, but I try to just knock out those barriers for individuals by reminding them. I think that some of our frozen foods have gotten a bad rap, that they're actually flash frozen and can be a great healthy option. And you can get some of these when they go on sale for like $2 a meal. We can get around it when we get savvy with
Uh,
it. But
yes, you're
but
absolutely right. Fresh
we
frozen
need.
is
Mhm.
perfect. That's true. That's true.
But we need our resources, right? We sometimes need a little handheld through all of that to build that confidence.
Sure, sure,
Yes.
sure.
So thank you. Thank you for keeping diet and nutrition simple. That was refreshing. So let's move on to sleep because sleep is one of those silly things that people still struggle with as far as don't give themselves permission to go to bed on time or they don't validate that it's actually as important as it is. Like Raina said, make us believers for a minute that sleep owns this spot in the six domains of health.
Yeah, well, it is an area that people struggle with a lot. look, the data suggests that the optimal amount of sleep per night is 7, 8 hours. Other people need 6 to 7. Some
Mhm.
people do well on 5. There's aspects of sleep we haven't looked at, like what's your sense of vitality, life purpose, and so forth. So that hasn't really been studied. So maybe sometimes people don't need as much sleep. But here's the thing: if you're not waking up feeling refreshed, there's a problem there. So look at that. If you're having trouble because of insomnia, things like that, then there's this whole sleep hygiene, and there's experts in that, and I am a big advocate of that.
Mhm.
Regularity in terms of sleep pattern is important too, you know? And, the old fashioned put down the phone and have a little book to read as a way of calming yourself down, a dark room, cooler room. These are all things that work. So these are things that if you're having problem with sleep, then you should attend to it. You should work it on. You're going to have more vitality. If you have a lot of poor sleep, it is a risk factor for heart disease in its own right. So it deserves attention.
Yeah, and it's amazing how people push through poor sleep and will not attend to it for way longer than, I mean, weight loss is something that everybody knows. They come in going, I know I should lose weight, but nobody comes in going, I know I should sleep better. And really, sleep might be way more important than another area that they're quick to attend to. So thank you. I'm going to highlight this for our listeners again, this whole, if you're waking up and you're not refreshed, and that doesn't mean that you have to like bounce out of bed and be like, it
Right.
just means that you cannot go through your whole morning and feel exhausted. Then you did not sleep well. Is that kind of how you would assess that?
Yes, I would assess that. Now, I'd add one other thing to sleep, which is that, let's say you're not sleeping well or getting enough sleep, the power nap, that 10 minutes, and even if you're not napping, just learning easy muscle relaxation and finding a chair, even at work or someplace that's quiet, and doing that for 10 minutes. I mean, I use that a lot. I mean, I've always found that helpful. And so it's individual. Some people can't do it. Some people don't like to do it. But some people, I think, are just not taking advantage of what that could offer them.
Right. And just from my dietitian perspective, there's so many times that my clients are eating through where they're actually just tired. And if they would just attend to their sleep, then the eating decreases because a lot of us are hungry for something else. We are hungry for sleep. We are hungry for, um, social time. It's kind of everything that you're talking about. We can be hungry for and filling with food where we really need to be addressing another aspect of our life.
Can I
Um,
take you back to an anecdote about that?
yeah, if you please.
There's a guy named Robert Thayer. He's no longer with us. His work was in the 1970s. But he does this tremendous work, and I think it relates to all the 6 domains of vitality, even if we don't get to all of them.
We will. We're almost there.
Okay. But he did this amazing work. And in those days, it was low tech, but he had people wearing beepers and he had them
Mhm.
record their energy level and the mood and what they were doing. And this went off at different times. And he found out that, first of all, that when people were he divided them into calm and energetic, calm and tired, tense and energetic, and tense and tired. And so what I ask people is, well, this tense and energetic, this is like we feel a lot of during the day, right? What did it look like? Did it look like more like calm and energetic or tense and tired? Turns out that it looked more like calm and energetic. In other words, we handle tension well as long as we have our energy about us. But when we don't have our energy about us, when we're tense and tired, that's when people reach for the candy bar, or if they're smoking cigarettes, they reach for that. All the quick fixes, because we don't like that combination of tense and tired.
That's
So he
good.
followed it up with this study. It's amazing. He took a bunch of volunteers and he had them on one point in the morning, one point in the afternoon, record how they were feeling in terms of energy, and then he gave them a candy bar. In another case, he had them do a brisk walk for 5 minutes. And he found that both the candy bar and the brisk walk for 5 minutes increased the energy just as much right away. But an hour later, the people who had done the brisk walk were feeling more energetic than the people that had the candy bar.
That's good.
So it's a little bit of cognitive override, but when you feel tired, your brain says, I'm too tired to walk. I need something to eat. No, you don't. You need to take a brisk walk.
Oh, that's so good. I love that you have research to back this up.
I do all the research.
I know I could pick your brain all day on research. I love evidence-based.
I love it too.
So thank you. Oh my gosh. Okay. Emotions is your next piece of, and again, you separate this out with thinking quality. So start with the emotion piece.
Well, the emotion piece, you look at the negative part in terms of like depression or whatever. We're actually built to be happy. We're built to be happy because you look what happens when we're not. But then you have to decide, well, what does it mean, happiness? Is happiness, humor or whatever? Well, it's good to have happy moments and shared moments and all that. But I look at happiness in terms of the half-life, in terms of what's your sense of purpose? What's you feel really excited about what you're doing? Do you feel engaged? So that's kind of where what happens is that, a sense of emotions are information. So, when you're feeling, hey, wait, I'm feeling down or I'm feeling, anxious, why? So what happens is we don't stop to think about it. We're in such a fast world today, and you're at the bus stop. What do you look like when you're at the bus stop? You're looking at the cell phone. There's no time when we just connect to our emotions anymore, but they're information. But you want to say, hey, look, if I'm not feeling happy, what can I do 1% better in my life? Maybe it's about my work goals. Maybe it's about my social relationships. Maybe it's about, maybe I ruminate too much and I need to figure out how to do that less. I mean, it's a whole discussion in terms of that, but that's just a general principle around it. There's the happiness in a state, and there's a happiness in terms of what those things do that as a byproduct, I feel happier.
Mm-hmm. I think, yes, our takeaway for now, because this is so much more, but is that our emotions are information. And if we're not listening to that information, then we don't know where to go build insight, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And use if you're feeling down as a cue. Okay, accept it first of all and say, well, how can I get better here? And there's many things to discuss with that. It might relate to the stress in your life. It might relate to a sense of chronic time pressure. All these things. So I say these 6 domains are interrelated. If you get on the on-ramp in one of them, it's like a virtuous cycle where you start to improve in others. And by the way, one of the best and available approaches for improving emotions is exercise. One of my colleagues, Dr. James Blumenthal at Duke, he did 3 classic studies. These were randomized controlled studies funded by the NIH, where he took people with depression, randomized to an SSRI, an antidepressant medication, or to an exercise regimen. Again, a controlled randomized study. So they were normal, staying at rest, equal level of improvement in terms of lifting of depression with exercise. But of course, with the health benefit associated with exercise. So he showed that in classic study. Now we have many papers which show the mechanisms by which exercise can lift emotions. So it's one of the best places to start when you're not feeling good. And you see these stories all the time. There's in the New York Times and the other newspapers, interest stories of people who had been down and out, and then they got divorced or something happened, and then he took on marathon running, and all of a sudden the whole life turned around. So exercise is a great tool when you're not feeling great.
It is. And again, there's research behind it. And this is such a cool part of this whole episode is that I wish doctors could hand the prescription out of exercise, right? And I know it's being said and it's being taught, but really understanding that importance, having the patient walk away going, this is my jump off point, my starting point, because it really could equally make that same difference. So thank you. So good. So good. And we will finish up with this thinking quality. Yeah, this is an interesting term for me. So I'm interested.
So it turns out that if you look at these domains, the thing we've least studied is the quality of our thinking. Yet we all have mindsets.
Yeah.
We all have patterns of thinking which are very intimate to ourselves, and they affect our quality of life. Well, the first of these studies were only done around the year 2000, which tells you this is a completely new science. But people began to look at people's sense of optimism versus pessimism. And we developed a scale, not me, but people developed a scale, which is uniformly used now throughout the world. And now there have been 15 to 20 published studies. In fact, we did a meta-analysis of it in terms of looking at all-cause mortality, in terms of people living longer, in terms of heart disease. People who are optimistic live longer, they have less heart disease, they have better health habits, and pessimists are the opposite. So your quality of thinking affects your health. Interestingly, because after we published this paper, I had to do some interviews. The first question is, what do you do to be more optimistic? And I said, don't start there. Because you start with mini goals and start to feel more confident about achieving them. I said, start with gratitude, because gratitude is something that we can all work on. And there's enough data now in the medical sphere to say, yes, when you feel more grateful, you have better health as well. But we're not built to be grateful because we're built to take things for granted. That's just the way we are. Gratitude is a muscle you have to develop. And so, again, the biggest problem there is we hear it as lip service. Everyone agrees, yes, let's be more grateful. But it takes work to do it. And by the way, a good place to start also is with your eating. Can I put, the tube down? Can I, put the distractions down, a newspaper down, and just eat? I did this at a lecture about 2 years ago, and I asked how many people in the room can just sit and eat with doing nothing, and the room started laughing, because we all related to it, and I have the same problem, by the way, too.
It is. We're multitaskers, aren't we?
Yeah. So that's the place to start. It turns out I'm teasing out this data, but it turns out that people who are more forgiving, as opposed to people who hold on to resentment, in terms of certain cardiovascular parameters, they do better as well. So I think that's going to be another area where your quality of thinking is really important. So working on your mindsets, which means taking on the work, and it's something that you're going to live with, and we can all improve our mindsets too.
Right. Right. Oh, absolutely. And it's funny when somebody's just sitting on the outside, that fly on the wall, listening to us talk today, it kind of feels easy, right? It all feels like, okay, that's tangible. We can work on that. And then when we go to set out to work on it, they're onion layers. And I just want to set everyone's expectations appropriately that every time you peel back an onion layer, there will be a new one that you need to investigate and build insight around. But it's worth doing the work, because once you do the work, you transform. You're a different person on the other side of it. And you're laying out the formula. We're always asking for the formula, and you're like, here it is. This is the formula. You will be your best 80-year-old, 90-year-old self if you work on these six domains. So, oh my goodness, this is so good. Thank you. I would love to know if people are loving this talk and going, where do I get more of Dr. Rozanski? Where would you like to send individuals?
Sure. So for all these years I've been in the medical space doing this research, writing medical articles. About 2 years ago, I started giving my fellows talks on all these 6 domains, and it developed a life of its own. And then I ended up doing a couple in the community. And I said, oh, wait, I guess I'm missing the boat here. I got to talk more to people. So I'm now on LinkedIn, just have started, being really active on it. And I will have a website under my name in 6 to 8 weeks. So
Okay.
you'll be able to find me both places.
And I'm shocked you don't have a book yet for us. In all your free time, you haven't written a book?
I've been writing medical articles all these years. They're a lot of work. I don't know. Maybe someday. I'm not thinking about it at the moment.
I know you got a lot
Everybody
on your
writes a
plate.
book. Maybe at some point.
I love it. Well, I normally ask my guests if you can wrap your arms around all of our listeners if they hear nothing else and the one thing you want them to hear. I feel like you've kind of already answered it with exercise, but do you have any last little follow-up points for us that if somebody were to walk away, say, take this?
I'll tell you what comes to mind. it's kind of a PR for you, but not intentional. I was listening to some of your recent podcasts, and you had about this one about meeting or taking your 80-year-old self. And your idea there was, think about your 80-year-old self, write a letter to that self. What do you want to do today to promote that self? And I thought that was so incredibly profound because we're living in a generation now where we've moved the goalposts. And that's a wonderful thing. It used to be, how will I be in my 70s? You really have to think about how you'll be in your 90s today. And, what I say is that the first 30 years of life is a gift. The second 30 years is a glide. And the last 30 years is a slide where things are just really deteriorating because we're aging, muscle mass again, deteriorating at a more rapid pace. But it's hard for us to think about ourselves as we're going to be older. We tend to project from today. And there's a whole psychological piece about this. We don't have time. But I thought, how do you capture relating to yourself as older? And I thought your podcast, which I would recommend to everybody, and the letter you suggested to write to yourself and to, shake the hands of your 80-year-old self and think about it from time to time. Very profound, very profound.
My goodness, thank you. I'm feeling so humbled just getting this opportunity to hang out with you today and pour all of your wisdom over our guests. So seriously, thank you. Thank you. We will put all of your information in the show notes and maybe we can sneak you back on at some point if you're open to it.
I'd be delighted. I'd be delighted to come back on. Delighted.
All right. Thank you again, Dr. Rozanski.